Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. A very interesting conversation in store for you with Dr. Samuel Gregg. We're talking religion and the Tea Party.
He is the Director of Research at the Acton Institute and the author of The Tea Party Catholic. Intriguing? Stick around. We'll explain for you. The Florida Roundtable will begin following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry, and don't we have a lot of politics to talk about today?
Oh, my goodness, yes. It's been a busy week, and we got a lot of things to say, so I'll let you kick it off.
Well, first off, I want to tell you about Tough TV. You can watch us on Tough TV here in Orlando on Channel 38. You can receive Tough TV over the air with an antenna. You get that HD quality in select apartment complexes and in mobile home parks in Central Florida. Also on Tough TV 38 is carried on Channel 69 on the Summit Broadband cable system. And if you can't receive Tough TV, I think you should get mad because that's the favorite pastime of Americans is being angry. I think you should show your outrage in a quiet, dignified manner.
There you go. That's
Call your
right.
cable TV company, bang your fist just a little, and ask for Tough TV 38.
Angry but polite.
Yes.
Okay.
Because remember, outrage, I mean, it's bigger than baseball now, isn't it?
I think so.
So Charlie Crist,
my
Uncle
goodness.
Charlie, is
Yeah,
running for governor.
Yep.
Now, let me adjust my mic because I got to lean forward here on this.
His hat is in the ring.
Charlie Crist, Florida's charismatic Republican governor. He was a national star in his party. He declared Ronald Reagan to be his role model. He came close to becoming John McCain's vice presidential running mate in 2008. What happened, Charlie? Charlie's declared this past week he's running for governor, so I guess we were wrong on that point. We were thinking back for Congress, but he wants the big job again. However, now he's a Democrat. What happened, Charlie?
He ran into a road bump called Marco Rubio.
And now he's running into another roadblock called Scott.
Yeah.
Now, I got to tell you, Reagan, I don't know who's more shallow, Scott or Crist here. I'm no fan of politicians generally. Nothing personally against Rick Scott. He's a symptom of a larger issue, which we're going to discuss with our guest coming up. But let's just look at this here. This is pretty wacky stuff.
Which way is the wind blowing today, Charlie?
Yes.
And which way do you keep the best tan? I'm not.
And you said, as far as Democrats go, you have a colleague who had some pretty strong opinions.
A very liberal colleague of mine, lifelong, got some years, just doesn't trust him. And I think that, in the upper echelons of the Democratic Party, it'll be all flag waving and boy, hurrah, hurrah, and this is wonderful. But I caution them to remember what happened in the state of Pennsylvania when the long-serving Republican senator up there, who was sort of a liberal Republican, if you could say that there was such a thing, decided that he couldn't win a Republican primary, and he switched to the Democratic Party.
Oh, that would be Specter.
Arlen Specter.
Arlen Specter, the magic bullet man.
And then who could not even win the Democrat primary,
Yeah. Arlen Specter was another one. That was the guy who came up with the magic bullet theory that said that one bullet went through Kennedy and hit Connolly and came out pristine. So that's the quality of politicians that, of course, we are talking about.
Well, he's the most recent example.
Yes.
Now, there are examples of party switching that do work. You have to go back across the years to find them, But
you know why you have to go back?
Because they were worked in so
at
long.
least when it used to be done, it was done from a higher ethical standpoint.
Sure.
We're going to be talking about ethics coming up in the show with Dr. Gregg, but let me say this. What do you expect? They're politicians. This is what they do.
Yeah.
If it's ethically challenged or ethically bereft or ethically non-existent, well, you'll find guys like Charlie and Scott. These guys would probably do well going out for a drink together. They probably get along wonderfully. But
you asked me a couple of weeks ago for my prediction on this election, and I'm not going to pick a winner at this point. But what I want to go out and say is that maybe this is not so much of a prediction, but I think that we are about to witness the most expensive gubernatorial election in United States history, and one of the dirtiest elections that we have ever seen for governor in the United States, period.
Which means it's going to be a lot of fun for us.
There you go. That's right. This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
We will be joined by Dr. Samuel Gregg when the conversation continues. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are joined at this point in the program by Dr. Samuel Gregg. He is the Director of Research at the Acton Institute. He's written and spoken extensively on questions of political economy, economic history, ethics and finance, natural law theory. Wow, degrees in political philosophy from the University of Melbourne, Doctor of Philosophy, degree in moral philosophy, political economy from the University of Oxford, and on and on. Wow, boy, am I impressed. Wow. Dr. Gregg, welcome to the Florida Roundtable, sir.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you.
As opposed to my going on with all of this, how about you go ahead and take the first minute and tell us a little bit more about yourself and the Acton Institute?
Well, the Acton Institute is a think tank, I guess you'd describe it, and we've been around for almost 20 years, and our focus is very much upon the economy and explaining how it works, and more or less, I guess you'd call it free market economics, but also trying to ground it in an ethical sense of what people are supposed to be doing with their lives, and also showing that things like business and commerce, while they're wonderfully good in terms of their capacity to produce economic growth and things like that, they're also good for people as people. They help us flourish as who we're supposed to be. So we spend a lot of time researching these subjects. We do work all over the world, not just in the United States. We hold lots of conferences. We hold an entire summer university that addresses these themes, in which we had something like 1,000 people coming every year. So that's what we do, and our outreach is growing all the time. We have the happy problem of lots of people wanting us to do many things and having to make choices about those things we do and those things when we say, we'll get back to you later.
Going back to the very beginning of this, in the opening days, what was the thinking as this group began to come together? I mean, why did you folks feel it was necessary?
Well, for a number of reasons. I think the main reason was that when it comes to the economy, the market economy, people are usually very good at explaining why it works, why it's more efficient, why it creates wealth in ways that, say, social democratic systems don't. But where people are often lacking when it comes to the promotion of market economies is their sometimes incapacity to articulate it in, let's call it, moral terms, to explain that this isn't just good because it's efficient and it creates wealth. It's also good because it provides people with the space they need to live out their freedoms. And that's, of course, a very American insight. I think that's very much true of the American experiment right from the very beginning. But I think it's also true of the need to explain how markets work. And the way that we do this is not just by simply saying that, well, it's more efficient than other systems, but also because it's a way in which people can live out their destiny as they're supposed to in the realm of the economy.
I'd like to...
I think that part of the problem was that a lot of people just didn't take the moral dimension particularly seriously, which meant that you effectively conceded the case for the market economy on moral grounds to those people who are more or less advocating social democratic and socialist arrangements.
Dr. Gregg, appreciate you coming on the show with us. I have some interesting thoughts with you. You're obviously a gentleman who is making some good points about the ethical component. I believe that capitalism functions best when there's an ethical component. When the ethical component is missing, then you have a void that is filled by government in terms of regulation, etc. And regulation obviously has its place, but is not. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's inevitable, because of the ethical, I guess you could say, the ethical void that exists in many cases within capitalist organizations, corporations, etc., where you're seeing pollution on a grand scale, where you're seeing I could almost say, well, there's a global trade, but almost it's a it would behoove me to say that, how do you get out of this? Right now we're in a catch-22, and I wanted to see your thoughts, because there is exploitation of many workers across the globe, here in the United States as well, because of the lack of the ethical component. So how do you do that? How do you get people ethically minded where government does not have to step in? Because you're going to have one or the other.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. And when you have, usually when you have lots and lots of regulation, there's one or two things going on. One is there are people who simply don't trust the workings of the market because they think that the alternatives are better. That's one thing. But the second thing, I think you're right, is that when you have this absence of serious moral reflection about how one runs one's business, how one trades, how one treats the people you work with or who work for you or who you work for, if you have a void in that regard when it comes to your capacity to take responsibility for yourself and to order your life according to those truths that we can know, then I think inevitably people will start looking to the state to fill in the gap. And the problem, of course, is that the state is really bad at doing that. It's really, really bad. Why? Well, partly because I think the state inevitably tends to move towards a bureaucratic approach to these sorts of issues. Secondly, I think that regulations often have what people like me who work in the world of economics call unintended consequences. Because when you start to regulate particular aspects of the economy, people adjust to that situation. And the other thing that happens when you have too much regulation is that more and more people start to gravitate towards getting close to politicians, getting close to government officials, getting close to the different departments that oversee different parts of the regulatory regime, instead of creating wealth. So their way to basically make their businesses grow is to get pretty much into bed with the government. And you see this in the form of things like regulations that are designed to aid parts of one industry but not others. You see this in subsidies given to particular industries rather than others. And so in other words, it ends up with a type of corporate welfare.
Well, we used to call it fascism, and I think that's an appropriate word for it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a real problem now. And in fact, I've called this the new corporatism, whereby you have a situation that more and more businesses, and this has already happened in Europe, but it's happening now in the United States, start gravitating towards the state as the place where you make money, rather than asking yourself, how do I create something that's new? How do I exercise my gift of entrepreneurship? How do I work out what consumers want and need and then sell them a product at a competitive price? And what you have effectively is more and more of the economy gravitating around government rather than being focused upon what consumers actually want. You know, Obamacare is in one sense a manifestation of that parallel economy that exists now, but it exists in things like the immense subsidies that are handed out to businesses and corporations every year. And I'm very pro-business, I'm very pro-commerce, I'm very pro-free trade, I'm pro all these things. But there is a real problem when the state and business starts to get into bed with one another, because you're no longer in a free economy anymore. When that happens, what you end up with is a type of parallel economy that's parasitic upon the market economy.
Let me kind of backtrack a little bit. You're approaching the answer to the question that I wanted to ask you, but I wanted to put a little bit of historical point on this, and that is that for decades, many, many years, we go back into the 1930s, a majority of Catholics and many of the Christian evangelicals were loyal Democrats. They backed Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. They backed LBJ and his Great Society, the war on poverty.
Right.
What is it that happened? What we're talking about here is starting to see a great deal of change. Well, obviously, for many years, Catholics and evangelical Christians accepted those kind of things as being positive and good. What happened in that mentality? Why is it taking so long?
Well, I think there's a number of things going on. One is that, of course, Christians have this non-negotiable obligation to help their neighbor in need. I mean, you can't be a Christian, be you a Catholic or an evangelical, and say, well, I have no responsibility for the poor whatsoever. That's simply completely incompatible with the gospel. But the question, I think, what has happened, I think, the problem has been that many people of the type that you're describing, and I talk about this a lot in my new book, Tea Party Catholic, I think what a lot of people that you're describing, the mistake they made was that they assumed that helping the poor, exercising an option for the poor, means somehow you have to be in favor of big government. In other words, the option for the poor is an option for bigger, larger welfare states, lots and lots of regulation, and frankly also a certain suspicious of businesses. Business are there, the people who are exploiting those in need, etc., etc. And in my book, Tea Party Catholic, I talk about this a great deal and explain how this arose. And it's more complicated than I'm describing, but I think that's more or less the picture. And I think it's only now, over the past, since the 1980s, that those sorts of links between the Democratic Party and Catholics have started to break down. In fact, they're more or less completely breaking down. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that more and more people are realizing that the state is not actually really very good at helping those in poverty. We've spent trillions of dollars on trying to address poverty in this country and around the world, but poverty as a sort of measure of those people who are experiencing significant lack of material needs, etc., that basically, that number stopped dropping in about 1972. So, really we've been treading water all this time, and I think a lot of people are saying it's time for a new constructive approach. But before you do that, I think there needs to be a type of ethical rejigging of the way we think about these things and realize, no, caring for the poor does not mean we opt for big welfare states. It doesn't mean we constantly hinge business. Instead, we have to think of creative ways of unleashing their own potential, of finding ways in which they can participate in the market economy, not least because when someone works, it's always much more affirming of their dignity than when you simply give them a welfare check.
I definitely concur with that statement about government. Even with the best intentions, you've heard the old phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Before we had the New Deal and of course the rise of big government, we had private organizations that took up the slack, ethical Christian, Jewish organizations that took up the slack, that were able to help their fellow man, like you said in the gospel, to help the poor, to help the downtrodden. But we didn't need government. Now all of a sudden government comes in, says we can do it better. We have good hearts. We're good people. We're patriotic. We're going to help alleviate the suffering of the masses here in the country. And people go, okay, well, we can sign on to that. Of course, that alludes to Reagan's earlier comment about why the Catholics and Christians latched onto the Democratic Party at the time. And then, of course, you saw the rise of government. Now, there's the problem, as you know. The more control you give government, the more they want. There's never enough.
Because the problem is that part of the government-first approach is that it assumes several things. First of all, it assumes that somehow governments can know enough about particular social and economic problems in a way that they can approach these things in a very rational, structured way, a sort of top-down approach to dealing with poverty. Well, we know that doesn't work. We know that because there's no way a government or government officials in Washington, D.C. can understand, for example, why, I don't know, a family, for example, has imploded in the south of California. There's no way they can know everything about that particular family's situation. So what happens is that governments tend to revert almost instinctively towards a one-size-fits-all approach to money and to property, I should say. And it usually means if only we spend more money, this will somehow fix the problem.
And actually, we're going to take that point to the next segment, so
Sure.
we're going to take a break right here.
We have to allow our audiences to throw some money at the cash register, as it were here. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Dr. Sam Gregg. He is with the Acton Institute. If you'll stay put, our conversation continues following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm the ethical Al Spry.
Yes, sir. And our very special guest this day is Dr. Samuel Gregg. He is with the Acton Institute. He's got a brand new book, The Tea Party Catholic, talking about the faithful Christians, Catholics, Tea Party, Libertarian, but I wanted to let you go back and finish up that thought where we had to take a break there at that last segment, Dr. Gregg. The government taking a one-size-fits-all sort of attitude to welfare problems. This notion that a big government can solve any problem in the world simply by throwing money at it. Boy, did I get tired of that in a hurry. But go ahead.
You and me both.
Finish up that thought, yeah.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that the traditional American way of dealing with these problems before the New Deal was that civic associations, many of which, of course, in fact, most of them were heavily religiously based, took responsibility for dealing with those problems that they were aware of and that were around them. So if a family was experiencing problems, then their local community and their churches or religious associations would come in, and they would be the ones who would take care of the problem. And in fact, when probably the most astute observer ever of the United States, a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville, when he came to the United States in the 1830s, and he wrote this fantastic book called Democracy in America, and he was talking about how freedom functioned in the United States, he pointed out that this is how Americans dealt with social problems. They banded together in civil associations, often religiously based, and that's how they took care of these issues. And I explain in Tea Party Catholic some of the background to that and why it happened. But I think it's particularly important because at the moment, I think I worry that some of those, let's call them civil society approaches to dealing with some of these questions of poverty are starting to fray. That's partly because I think many people simply expect now the government to take care of many of these problems. I think also it's because, frankly, many religious associations themselves are now assuming that government exists primarily to take care of these problems instead of realizing their own obligations to those people in need. So that, I think, is one of the major cultural transformations that's going on in the United States right now that I don't think is actually particularly helpful.
Well, of course, we're seeing it in Europe. You sound British, so I'm assuming that you and obviously you spend a lot of time going to school there, and you see manifestations in that even to a greater degree than in America. Yes?
Oh, sure. In another book I had come out this year called Becoming Europe, I talk about this in a lot of detail and how Europe has more or less opted, and it opted a long time ago, I should say, for, let's call it a social democratic approach to dealing with social and economic problems. But of course, as we're seeing in Europe right now, that's actually financially and economically unsustainable. It fuels political extremism. It tends to produce enormous frustration within the society. And it produces what Alexis de Tocqueville referred to as soft despotism. By that he meant that citizens vote for those politicians who promise to give them stuff as long as they vote for them. So you get that vicious cycle whereby people keep voting for whoever promises to give them the most stuff. The problem with that picture, of course, is that at some point, I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said socialism fails because you run out of other people's money. And that, of course, is what has happened in much of Europe, but that's where the social democratic model will take you. And we're not down that path in the United States as far as Europe is, but I'd have to say that over the, past 8 years, we've certainly accelerated in that direction.
You know, I find it interesting. I want to touch on the name of your book, A Tea Party Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
A bit contradictory to some, controversial. Tea Party, more or less, was trying to get away from I think their whole focus was the not religious angle. So having Tea Party Catholic, explain that for us.
Sure.
Because some people would say, well, aren't you just replacing one form of control, the government, with another form of control, which is religion? Namely Catholic or other religions as well can fit into that mold. Not specifically picking on Catholic, but what's your answer to that?
Well, the reason I chose the title is that, there's a couple of things. One is that the book is trying to explain to Catholics in the United States that they can be in favor of things like limited government, a free economy, religious freedom, a robust business sector. They can be in favor of all these things because, A, it's consonant with their own tradition, their own religious tradition, but also I think it reflects some of the best instincts of the American experiment, of which Catholics were involved right from the very beginning. So that's the shorthand description of what one of the reasons why the book was called Tea Party Catholic. The second thing is that we're learning more and more about what the Tea Party movement consists of. And what we're discovering, of course, is that the idea that the Tea Party are these bunch of anarcho-libertarian nihilists they're often portrayed as being, is not at all true. In fact, there have been some interesting studies that have recently come out showing that most self-described people who call themselves as, say, they favor or they're part of this broad Tea Party movement, what are they? Well, they're mostly family people. They're married and have children. They are, broadly speaking, socially conservative types, so they're not at all particularly libertarian. A lot of them are small business owners. A lot of them are very angry about things like corporate welfare. They're very worried about things like Obamacare because they see this as really inhibiting their ability to grow their businesses. And more generally, they're concerned that the United States is drifting away from the key principles of its founding, which has made it such a nation that has been incredibly successful for the past 200 years. You know, most experiments in liberty, they tend to end very badly. But the United States is really very much an exception in that regard. So that's really the background to the book. It's not, and as for the issue of controlling society, the thing about religion is that it can't control people unless people freely adhere to a religion's precepts, right? You can't be forced to act in a way that's contrary to your religion unless you actually sort of believe in it yourself. And one of the things that people like de Tocqueville noticed when they came to the United States was that religion played an enormous role in everyday American life in making sure that liberty continued to flourish, that liberty did not become an excuse for ignoring one's obligations and responsibilities for other people. So de Tocqueville said, in America, religion and liberty tend to go hand in hand, whereas in Europe, of course, the experience had been the exact opposite. The two were often in deep conflict. Well, so that's some of the reasons why I called the book Tea Party Catholic. And, of course, the title makes people pick up the book. And from a marketing standpoint, that's really important.
Well, now you've opened the door there, but we've quoted a Frenchman. So let me ask you, George Washington and the framers of the Constitution and their take on religious liberty and church and state.
Well, most of the founders, in fact, I'd say almost all of them, had an extremely positive view of religion. It was quite different to the French Revolution, where there was this strong hostility towards religion, Christianity, and Catholicism in particular. The American Revolution was never a war on religion. If you read many of the books of the period, they cover the period of the Revolutionary War and the events leading to the revolution and the revolutionary settlement afterwards. it was just seen as natural. Religion was seen as a natural part of life, and no one really thought of it as being problematic when it comes to human freedom. And in fact, when George Washington delivered his famous farewell address when he completed his second term as president and voluntarily decided to go into retirement, he talked in his farewell address about how religion was essential if you're going to have a free society. He's very unambiguous about it. I mean, extremely explicit about making this connection about you need to have a society in which a considerable number of people adhere to certain religious precepts if you want to have a free society. And that is what I think you find through most of the founders. Now, because I think there's this tendency to present the founders today as these sort of deistic Enlightenment types who saw religion as just having this mere civilizing influence upon people. But no, that's not true. If you read enough books of the period, if you read some of the memoirs and biographies of the founders, you discover that religion was absolutely essential, an absolutely indispensable part of the way that they lived their lives, and they really believed this stuff to be true. So in that sense, I think the founding points us very clearly in the direction of this compatibility between strong religious belief and a society that takes freedom seriously.
On that note, Doctor, we need to take another pause along our network line. Let us remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Dr. Samuel Gregg of the Acton Institute. We'll continue our conversation following these messages. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And our very special guest this day is Dr. Samuel Gregg of the Acton Institute. And, Doctor, thank you for spending so much time with us today. We know that you're a very busy man.
My pleasure to be with you.
I'd like to follow up on the point you made in the last segment about the Founding Fathers and the religious. Yes, I somewhat disagree on a few points with you, but I agree generally that the Founding Fathers were religious people. But I believe also they were products of the Enlightenment ideas at the time, obviously, the ideas of Voltaire and Locke, and that is one reason why we have freedom of religion in this country and we don't have a state religion, and we have separation of church and state, because the founders also realized the power of the Catholic Church at the time, power of the Protestant Church, and did not want to have that overreaching control to stifle the liberty in America. And of course, it worked very well. Many of the Founding Fathers were Masons. They ascribed to the idea, including George Washington and a lot of the others, who ascribed to the idea of the spiritual nature of man, but not ascribing it to a specific religious denomination. And that's where the idea of the natural state of man and the natural state of freedom come from, obviously from God, who Masons referred to as the great architect of the universe and don't ascribe to any specific religion. So I just wanted to clear that up. I agree with you on that point, but of course there was a large part of it had to do with Enlightenment principles, and I think that's where the Tea Party what people found so enticing about that, because the Tea Party is saying, why don't we follow what the founders originally conceptualized America to be, which was the new Atlantis. That's how they saw America. Separate from Europe, let's take a new land that has not been touched by Europeans, and let's create a new society based on Enlightenment principles, which, of course, you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the American founding, there are some people who have tried to portray it as, a founding of a Christian nation. Well, that's problematic because of some of the reasons you just described. There are also some who have more or less tried to locate the entire American founding in the 18th century Enlightenment. And as I argue in my book, Tea Party Catholic, I also think that's problematic. It's problematic for a number of reasons. One is, for example, that if you look at the founders' writings and you look at which texts they cite the most, the number one text, something like that's cited the most in terms of percentage-wise, is the Bible. It's something like almost 40% of the citations made by the founders in their writings are to the Bible. Then you go down the list and you get people like William Blackstone in his commentaries on law. You get Montesquieu, who comes in at around about 7 or 8%, and Locke is actually only cited about 2% at the time. So I think what it's true to say is that the American founding does reflect a mixture of Enlightenment principles, as you described them, but also this heavy assumption of this Judeo-Christian culture, which is simply part of everyday life. It was just something that was there. It wasn't something that they felt the need to point out or to somehow allude to, because it was more or less just part of the air that everyone breathed at the time. But I think the bigger point, of course, is that the American experiment is part of this general walking forward in the Western tradition of freedom and Western civilization. So in that sense, I think it takes the very best of the Judeo-Christian heritage, but it also takes, I think, the best insights of many of the Enlightenment thinkers. And that's what I think helps to make the American experiment quite different to some of the other experiments in liberty, such as the French Revolution, which was overwhelmingly influenced by the French Enlightenment, which was deeply hostile to religion per se, and in fact tended to look to the state to solve all sorts of problems. So I think the picture is a more mixed one than a lot of people appreciate.
I agree with that, actually.
Before we have to run away, I want to throw one last name at you and let you talk about him for a minute. Charles Carroll of Carrollton.
Yes, well, he's really the original Tea Party Catholic. He was the only American Roman Catholic to sign the Declaration of Independence. Remember, the Catholics were a tiny minority of the population at the time. He was probably the most well-educated of all the founders. He knew, obviously, all the Christian tradition, but he also knew lots of Enlightenment thinkers as well. He was also the richest man in America at the time as well. And so he really laid it on the line, because he had much more to lose, materially speaking, than any other of the founders when he signed the Declaration of Independence. And he's very important, I think, because he's an example of the type of founder that we're referring to, this person who's very much influenced by this Judeo-Christian background, in his case specifically Roman Catholic, but also someone who's very aware of some of the great advances in human liberty that are occurring at that particular point in time. And I use him as an example to say to my fellow Catholics in the United States, we had a role in this founding, we have a part in this founding, and this movement today to roll back government and to expand the role of the market and to make sure that business and commerce flourish, we have a part in that because it's part of our heritage as well.
Dr. Samuel Gregg, he is the author of The Tea Party Catholic. He is with the Acton Institute. And Dr. Gregg, thank you so much for spending all this time with us today. I think it has been a most enlightening conversation.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
This is the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al and I will be back with a closing thought following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And what a pleasure and a delight to have such a well-spoken guest as Dr. Samuel Gregg with us, huh?
He's taken up the level of Florida Roundtable about 8 notches, especially with that English accent. I thought it was wonderful. Plus, he had a lot of cool things to say.
And I scarcely could see him rallying around with the Ku Klux Klan. Oops, did I say that?
Wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah.
All right, boys, we got Dr. Gregg coming out. Let's light the cross. Hello, it's good to be here at the KKK meeting. I want to talk about ethics. And
Yes.
let's talk about Rick Scott's Let's Get to Work donor, guy who donated to this whole Let's Get to Work program. Well, guess what happened with him? He laid some people off.
Uh-oh.
Bill Edwards is one of Rick Scott's top individual donors. He wrote a $500,000 check to Scott's Let's Get to Work re-election PAC. Ironically, almost 500 of Edwards' employees will not get to work soon. One of his companies, Mortgage Investment Corporation, abruptly announced yesterday it's laying off 476 workers, including 256 people at its St. Petersburg headquarters. So what is it now? Now it's the Let's Not Get to Work Anymore program? Wow. Is that what it is, or what?
I don't know. That's interesting, Al. Amazing.
Of course, Edwards' MIC has not been without controversy. It's been accused of misleading customers and violating national do not call registry rules. In fact, This past June, the company was hit with a $7.5 million fine, the largest fine ever handed down for violating the do not call rule.
Al, before we run away, let me stick in one personal note here that I want to invite folks on Saturday at 2:30 in the afternoon at the First Baptist Church on Merritt Island in in Brevard County. I will begin my 29th year as Master of Ceremonies of the Space Coast Pops. The concert this Saturday is free. It's a holiday gift concert. So if you happen to be in the Brevard County area or in Central Florida, come on by and say hello and enjoy some wonderful holiday music.
Awesome.
That's going to do it for us on the Florida Roundtable this week. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Thank you for your time. We'll see you next week with another edition of the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.